war and conflict, the war photographer, and poems to compare it to. So here's the annotated poem. But first, let me read it through. In his dark room, he is finally alone, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows, as though this were a church and he were a priest preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England, home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel. To fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes. A half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries of his man's wife. How he sought approval, without words, to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. From the aeroplane he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. So, let's look at the annotations of this poem before we move on to poet context. So it begins in his dark room. Now this settling of the dark room creates a very foreboding, eerie atmosphere. As though this were a church. Now this is a religious simile, and this reveals that he is aware of the impact that his photos have had on the public. There is also a parallel between the job of a priest and the job of a war photographer. Both are exposed to death and suffering. Now the simile also suggests that the mood is quite sombre. Now, in case you didn't understand what Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh means, the poet references various conflicts: the troubles in Ireland, the siege of Beirut, the Lebanese civil war, and the Cambodian civil war. So it's kind of a hint at what this is referring to and what the poem's topic and subject is about. All flesh is grass. Now this is a phrase from the Old Testament, which is often interpreted as meaning that life is transitory, fleeting. He has a job to do. Now this business-like terminology of having a job created by the monosyllables and the short sentence is quite a blunt way of referring to such horrible instances. Solutions slop. Now this is sibilance, and it is used in this instance to develop the harsh atmosphere that is created, which did not tremble then, though seems to now. Now it seems that at the scene of the conflict he was calm, but now he is agitated, perhaps because he will soon relive the conflict through the photos he is developing. And this particular reference also possibly hints at the idea of soldiers having to live with the actions they've committed and the actions others have committed and the trauma that they have to live, and how the mental effects are much worse afterwards. Now, in rural England, with ordinary pain which simple weather can dispel, problems are trivial, and a sunny day can make it all better. This contrasts with the war-torn settings he has been in, where pain, both emotional and physical, is devastating and traumatic. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes. Now this line literally refers to the process of the photograph coming into focus in a developing tray, but also gestures towards the perhaps dying agonies, how it's a process rather than an immediate thing. He remembers the cries. His auditory image is used to develop such a horrific and sad image. How he sought approval. He is aware that his presence and camera might seem intrusive, but believes it is important to document conflict. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6. Now, the agonies of war here are curated for the Sunday supplementary papers. This seems quite distasteful, and the idea of such a life being the largest sacrifice that anyone can give, being merely a supplement to a paper, really devalues and diminishes their efforts. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears. Now, the choice of eyeballs instead of eyes suggests the act of crying after seeing the photos is almost mechanical. They're not true, and they're not truly living and feeling empathetic for the soldiers. It's only a physical process, and secreting tears is not genuine. This non-superficial emotional response is also quite ugly. Eyeballs refers to ugliness, whereas eyes is much more revealing about a person. And the ending of "they do not care." So while the readers are seemingly moved to tears, these seem disingenuous to the photographer. He later states, "they do not care." This is quite a negative and quite a cynical remark on society. So, the poet is Carol Ann Duffy. She was born in 1955 and she was the UK's Poet Laureate from 2009 to 2019. She's friends with two famous war photographers, hence why she is interested in the difficulties and responsibilities posed by their role. Now, let's look at some structure and form essay points. You will notice that there's a rigid form. The tight 6 lines per stanza form, as well as the constant A, B, B, C, D, D rhyme scheme, reflects the rigidity and how it's at odds with the chaos caused by conflict, and perhaps reflects the order of rural England. As this structure does not change throughout, it can be interpreted that war photographers lack the power to change anything, as his work falls upon unreceptive audience. Now, structure. There is a clear cyclical structure here. The poem ends by describing the photographer referring to the war zone he came from on the aeroplane. The cyclical structure here creates a sense of futile repetition, and the continuation of past mistakes acts as evidence that the photographer's work has not changed anything. It's sort of just freezing the moment in time, leaving the listener with her realization. He stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. In this way, the poem ends on a defeated note. The photographer's sense of the reader's indifference or superficial sentimentality contrasts with the firm vocation that he expresses earlier. Do what someone must. And the religious simile in the first stanza suggests that their work is as important as a priest's. Let's look at some language devices. So, internal conflict is definitely a key theme within the poem. The photographer seems to be struggling with reconciling his life in rural England, but also being only capable of viewing this through the comparative lens of conflict, that roads don't explode and there is no nightmare heat. Rural England seems to be defined by its contrast to a conflicting war zone. Now, let's look at the response to conflict. The sibilant alliteration in solutions, slop in trays highlights the phrase's significance. Now, the literal meaning is that he is developing photos in a dark room. However, the implicit figurative meaning is that he is trying to offer solutions to the conflicts that he witnesses by raising public awareness of them. An awareness that might lead to the public putting pressure on their government to help end war. Now, the painful connotations of twist in strangers' features, twist before his eyes, shows the pain the images capture, as well as the painful memories they induce to the photographer. His role allows him to preserve the memory of those who have died, which is reflected in the paradoxical metaphor, half-formed ghost. There is a juxtaposition throughout the entire poem from lexis and semantic field of violence and religious imagery. Now, these suggest that enough is not being done to prevent war. The photographer is comparing a priest preparing to impart mass, which reminds the listener of the Christian value of peace and how it's highly juxtaposed in the sentiments of war. Now let's look at the extensive scale of conflict. Duffy uses asymptotic listing in Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh to refer to a wide range of conflicts. The plosives in this list create an aggressive sound, highlighting the way in which war impacts so many people. Meanwhile, the caesura causes the speaker to pause over each word and consider its individuality. Finally, poems to compare it to. So I've suggested that the best poem is With Charge of the Light Brigade, since both poems present characters who feel a sense of duty towards other people and are in a predicament. In Charge of the Light Brigade, Tennyson shows that the soldiers feel a sense of duty towards their leaders and as well as their country, whereas Duffy shows that the photographer feels a sense of duty towards the victims of war. That's documented. In terms of differences, Tennyson in Charge of the Light Brigade glorifies war through the grand religious imagery in Into the Valley of Death, whereas in War Photographer, the harsh reality of war is shown in the description of running children in a nightmare heat and blood stained into foreign dust. If you found this video helpful, be sure to subscribe, and for more advice on GCSE French, RS, Geography and English Literature and Language, make sure you subscribe. See you soon.